Okay, so again, I'm Molly, and this is the Photoshop tutorial. So do you all have the handout to follow along with? Okay. So if you can open up the Photoshop interface, it's this little PS icon. And so in the interface there are three different toolbars or panels. So on the left is, so this is similar to Illustrator, you'll see. On the left is the main tool panel, so your select. So there are different types of selection tools. There's this marquee tool, which has different shaped selection tools. The next one is a lasso, polygon lasso, or magnetic lasso tool, which is a different type of selection. And we'll get into all of these later, so don't worry about understanding what exactly they do yet. And this is the third selection type of tool, kind of the magic series of selection tools. And then crop, eyedropper, and if you click and hold the button, you see a whole list of different tools that pop up. So each one that has the little arrow in the corner, you're going to get a whole another pop-up of tools that you can use. Brushes, stamps, erasers, fill buckets, etc. And we'll get into the ones that you use most often throughout the tutorial. And then as you're clicking on these, if you notice the top bar will change each time you select a new tool. So this is kind of the tool options bar, and it gives you a whole new list of options to help you utilize that tool well. So let's just look at the brush one. So you, again, hold the little arrow and you can see this is the history of the brushes that I've used. So if you use a brush and you want to remember exactly what you used, that's where you'll go back to find the type of brush you used for a certain application. The next one has size, so small to large, etc. You just move the triangle up and down the scale. Hardness is basically, let's see if I can find, okay. So if I click on this solid circle, that's 100% hardness right now. But if I click on the one next to it, that's 0% hardness. So you see the difference is basically that feathering of the edges. So one's a full circle and the other one feathers out to the middle. So you can play with hardness depending on the application you use or you want to use it for. Then there are a lot of things that you don't really use unless you're total Photoshop expert. So the next thing that you actually could use is the mode, which we'll get into later, and the opacity, which you'll definitely be using. The rest of those icons you can feel free to play around with, but they're more advanced, I guess. So that's the option toolbar, which again changes as you change tools. And then on the right, similar to Illustrator, you have your panels. So color, where you can choose colors or swatches. And then the next one, adjustments. So if you hover over the little icons, you can get what they stand for. So adjustments are brightness, contrast, things that will manipulate your image. And again, just like all the other interfaces, there are multiple ways to access all these tools. So you can use the menu bar, you can use the toolbars, and then there are hotkeys as well, or shortcuts. And then probably most importantly is the layers panel again. So Photoshop, I think it's really important to keep everything in layers so that everything is easily editable. Once something's on a layer, you really have to select individual pieces out of that layer to edit. So if they're all in different layers, it's much easier to edit the entire file. So you'll end up having lots of layers in your Photoshop files. But just like any other program, you can, this little folder down at the bottom, you can make layer groups, all of that stuff. So that's the basic interface. Obviously there are other tools that you can feel free to play around with, but those are the things you'll use mostly. So enough talking, let's open something up and do something. So on the blog, actually, if you can pull that up, under tutorials, and this computer is fairly slow, so use this time to ask questions or catch up, whatever you need. So under tutorials and Photoshop, there are two different images that I've posted. So download the model photo, and open it in Photoshop. And by fairly slow, I guess I mean really slow. Sorry. Okay, finally we have our photo. So this is a photo of a physical model. So we've been talking a lot about making digital models and rendering those. This is a way where you can physically build, apply materials in real life, real time, take a photo, and then start to populate and maybe imagine what that space could be like architecturally. Okay, so let's see. Viewing is the same as Illustrator. You can scroll and then scroll left to right, up and down, and to zoom in and zoom out is Command or Control plus or minus, so same as Illustrator. And let's see. Okay, so now that we've got the photo in, you can see that I'm in crop right now. That's why I have these marks around, and this is depressed, I guess. I want to switch to select just so I don't accidentally crop anything. And now let's look at that adjustment panel. I'm going to do it in the menu, so you can do image adjustments. And the main ones you'll use, I've listed, are brightness contrast, which if you open that up, it's just a scroll bar, brightness, or contrast. But the main one you'll use is levels. Some people like to use curves, but again, that gives you a lot more information. Levels. So you'll see there's a histogram here, and then these little triangles. So from black, gray to white. And if I move that over and move this, you can see that the whole image is changing in tone, saturation, etc. So typically, this image is pretty good, mainly because it's black and white. It really uses the whole tone space, but sometimes you'll see an image that just has a lot of peaks here, and you'll want to move those triangles in to kind of crop that graph, if that makes sense. And then you'll be using the full tonal spectrum. And you can just do it by eye too, what looks good. So that looks pretty good, I think. Here's actually another tidbit. Oops. The laser printers print about 10% darker than what you see on your screen. So if you have an image that's fairly dark, it's going to be really dark when you print it on the laser printers. So those are the main ones in the computer labs. So almost all the images I print on the laser printers, I'll take out some of that darkness in this output levels. So you can see it just lightens up the entire image. So that's a handy, easy trick when you're trying to just quickly print something. Just open in Photoshop and adjust those levels, and it'll print well. On that, since you're plotting on Monday, the plotting paper, you typically plot on bond paper, and that lightens all the photos. So kind of keep track of what paper is darkening and what paper is lightening photos, because it'll affect the way your presentation looks. Okay, so we worked with levels. Let's just take a look at the other ones. So curves, like I said, it kind of does the same thing as levels, but in a more, it's more complicated. So I don't really use it when levels does what you need. And so like you can check out all of these on your own time, but the other one I use a lot is hue and saturation. So hue, you can change the entire kind of feeling of a photo by making it warmer or cooler or have a certain color, a hue to it, which helps a lot in presentations when you're trying to get cohesiveness between a lot of different images. So if they all kind of have the same hue or tone, it looks really nice. And saturation, exactly what it says, desaturating all the way to black and white, or saturating to amp up the colors. And lightness and darkness you'll use a lot as well. Lighting and making it darker. Pretty self-explanatory, I guess. I think those are the main, okay, black and white makes it black and white. And the other one I will use a lot is invert, which Andrea just mentioned. So you get kind of that X-ray looking effect, I guess. And while we're on this, I'll show you another way to use invert is, so this one isn't fully photoshopped, but this is a drawing that I just wanted to do on trace paper and just get the idea out. And when you take a picture of it, it's really yellowy and it's really hard to get that background out. And sometimes if you're printing on white paper, you'll see the outline of that yellowy paper. Even if it's in black and white, you'll see a gray outline. So if you just invert that, you get kind of a nicer, crisper image. And it looks kind of cool, like you did it in white charcoal and stuff. And anyway, so that's one use of invert that works well. Okay, so let's undo, get back to our regular image. Okay, a couple more things. So you'll see that this image is kind of yellowy from the lighting that the picture was taken in. So if you do Autotone, it's brighter, whiter, and Auto Color, you typically can remove some of those imperfections that happen to the camera. And so that's a really, those commands, those shortcuts are at the end of the packet. That's something I do when I bring a photo in. I just whip out those Auto Color, Auto Tone commands, check to make sure it didn't do anything weird, and it'll make your image a lot nicer in 2 steps. And auto contrast you can try as well, but it typically doesn't do all that much. Okay, you guys with me so far? Any questions? So this is kind of the image photo processing. You can do this for any image, and they'll look great. Another thing, let's see. This isn't on the sheet, but I think I want to cover it now. So if you see in this image, this line is kind of wonky. Maybe the model was built poorly or just the angle that you took the picture. You can correct that. So if you select all, so Command or Control A, or you can go to the menu, select all. You can edit, transform, distort. And this, we'll actually get into this later as well at a different point. And what this does is it gives you points that you can click and drag and distorts the image. Another handy thing, if you have rulers up top, does everyone have rulers on their interface? Okay, so if you don't, go to View and make sure that rulers is checked. I think it's really handy to have the rulers there just to keep everything in line and make sure you're the right scale. But if you have the rulers, you can just click and drag and you'll get a guideline. And so I can kind of skew this photo to line up that ceiling plane somewhat straightish. Okay, let's say that's good. And when you're in transform, you have to press enter to leave that command. A lot of times I'll still be in that command trying to do other things and it's not working. It's like, what's going on? Just try to enter and get out of that command. Okay. And to get rid of the guidelines, you can just drag them back up into the ruler. So then you can do Control or Command D to deselect. You'll do a lot of Control A, Control D, because you can't just click to deselect anything in Photoshop. You have to physically select and deselect. Okay. Okay, so image looks pretty good so far. Let's work on composition. So let's do the crop tool, which you can either click or press C for crop. Another little interesting tidbit. So if you look, all of these different crop tools are marked with a C at the end, meaning their hotkey is all C. So to switch between the different crop tools, press Shift and C, and you'll see that the little icon changes to a different crop tool each time I do that. Okay, so that can be kind of handy instead of going in and pressing all the buttons. Okay, so the only crop tool I ever use is this top one. I don't know if anyone else used any other ones. You can always play with them, but, huh? For?
Adjusting perspective of place for flash.
Nice. I always use perspective transform, which we'll get into. Okay, so this stuff on the right-hand side looks kind of junky. Maybe I was being lazy modeling. And the stuff on the left side really has those rich reflections and the material qualities that I want to focus on. So let's make this composition more focused on that side and get rid of the rest. So in a non-Photoshop sense, composition is really important in general to focus in what you're showing. Just like diagramming, your focus on something really specific should be the same way here. It's the same way as, I guess, picking a view in your Rhino renderings and whatnot. Okay, so cropped, that's good. I like to hit V, which is this move tool or arrow tool, just to get myself out of crop again, because you'll be surprised how easy it is to accidentally keep cropping. And now we have a nice image that I think we can start manipulating and adding figures, etc. Any questions so far on the image manipulation? Pretty straightforward. A lot of it's just playing and trying different things to get the look you're going for. Okay. Oh, quickly, yesterday we talked about image size and DPI. In Photoshop, it would be under Image and Image Size. And here's where you can change all of those options. So resolution in pixels per inch, and then the size of the image. Okay, so if you're bringing in renderings and need to change something, that's the area you do that. All right, so if you look at the Layers panel, the layer comes in as background, and it's locked. And actually, background files, you can only manipulate the image. You can't blend it or add different layer effects onto it. And so typically you want to unlock it as a background file, and there are two ways to do that. One is to right-click and do Layer from Background. And let's just name this model. And now it's a new layer. And actually, I think that's always the first step. But something else you can do to help keep yourself organized and not lose information, which is really easy to do in Photoshop, I think, is to duplicate this layer. So I just right-clicked on the layer, duplicate, model copy, and then click the eye so you're not seeing this underlying model copy. So that way you're always going to have that file that's already made beautiful through image processing, and then you can work on the model copy to start adding things. Okay, so that's a way to be sure you always have that image if need be. Okay, so layers, like I said, you can group, which is on the bottom. A lot of the layer options are here at the bottom. The folders to group, and then this little page icon is a new layer. And layers, like in most programs, but especially in Photoshop, I think it's useful to think of them as like acetate or clear sheets that are just stacked on top of each other. And so each layer is a new sheet, and so this little checkered part of the icon means it's transparent. And then when you start to draw on it, obviously you're adding material to that layer. And they are ordered from bottom up. So let's see, if I draw something in this layer, let's pick a color we can see. And let's make this a little bigger. Okay, so I'm clicked on layer 1. I selected the brush, and now I'm just going to draw something. Okay, and if I click on model copy, drag, oops. So if I change the order by holding and dragging, similar to other programs, you'll see that now that model copy is on top, hiding what's below it. So simple concept, but again, you'd be surprised how easy it is to start to lose things in the layers. Okay, so I'm going to drag that back down to the bottom so we can draw on it. To delete a layer, click on it and either trash it with the little trash can icon, or again, right-click and trash it. Pretty simple. What else do I have here? Oh, okay. So here's a good use of layer sections. Let me show you an example. Okay, so this is Alex Hogfree, I can't say his name, but there's a lot of tutorials on the blog of his, which they're amazing, so I recommend all of them. And so this is something where he took line work, like something in Illustrator, and then took it into Photoshop to collage these materials in. And each of these wood panels is kind of a tile. So originally he duplicated the layer over and over again, and then grouped all those layers together. And that helps with workflow because if you have a group, you can click on the group and modify it, and everything in the group will be modified. Okay. And we'll get more into this when we start adding layers, but again, really important to keep your layers organized. Okay, so let's make a new layer. And let's test out the brush tool again. So click on brush. And let's just add, I don't know, some cool design on the floor. So something good, if you don't understand the pixel size right away, just click one and you get the little icon. So this is pretty small. Let's increase it, something like that. Looks good. Hardness, let's just do about 50%. And then opacity, let's start at 100. And you can see it's opaque. It's got some feathering on the edges due to the hardness. And then let's change the opacity to, I don't know, 30. Okay, so much different. The white is shining through from underneath versus the really opaque green. Now something pretty interesting about this, if you go over to the layers, this menu bar that says normal, click on that and you get all these different options. So these are blend modes, is what they're called. And so let's do overlay. Oh, that didn't work because I didn't have. Let's do. So this is kind of a bad example, sorry. But basically, if you click through all these blend modes, you get different. You can see that what's happening is the image layer and your layer with the paint are starting to merge in different ways, so they're starting to affect one another. So instead of being those two stacks, they're starting two stacks of acetate, I guess, or two different layers. They're starting to combine in different ways. We're going to use this more when we start adding things. Okay, so that is kind of new layer, brush tools, understanding how the brush toolbar works, and then this blend mode. Any questions so far? Straightforward enough? Okay. All right, so as you've already seen, let's talk this transparency and opacity we're going to talk about next. So you've seen that there's opacity here in the toolbar, which is only for that tool. So when we drew the 100 and then the 30, they're both on the same layer, different opacities. However, in the layers bar, the opacity here will affect the entire layer. So if I go down to 26, you see that the whole layer is now affected by the opacity. Okay? And then one more difference, fill versus opacity. So it's a little confusing. Opacity, no matter what, in the levels or the layers bar, is going to affect the entire layer. But fill, on the other hand, will only affect parts of it. And the parts that it doesn't affect, if you double click on layer 1, you get a layer style menu. And now there's a whole bunch of different styles and techniques you can add effects to the layer. And if we do this, let's say we add outer glow, which is a good one for lights, you get a whole nother menu. As per usual, lots of ways to change things. Make sure your preview is clicked on at all times, because a lot of this is just doing it by eye. So we don't really see much right now, but if we increase the size, maybe. I guess it's not really. You can kind of see it changing. It's hard because it's on white. Should have moved it over. But if you look at this right-hand one, so there's no glow to it now. And if I bring that over, you start to see that it brightens up on the outside of it. We can play with this again later to show it a little better. But anyway, so if you have a layer style attached to your layer, so like outer glow, now that shows up here, you have an effect attached to your layer. Fill will affect the opacity of everything but that effect. Okay, so it's a way to get around manipulating even more. Okay, so that's the only difference between opacity and fill. Let's see. Yeah.
If you say select something like outer glow, you love this white kind of fuzzy sheen, change
The color?
the color.
I believe so. Let's check it out. So you can double click the effects again. Click outer glow. And here, that little swatch, like in Illustrator, you can change the color you want. If you're using this for lights, you want to try and match the color of the light, so if it's white or if it's yellow. which I guess speaking of that, I can show you another couple images which are pretty cool. This is again Alex, who does the Photoshop tutorials. So he just did this in SketchUp, and then this is his final Photoshopped image. So you can see that there's a lot to be learned in Photoshop. And so all of these little lights are painted in and then have that glow effect, that outer glow effect. Okay. Yeah. It's really simple. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So kind of just SketchUp blocked out a little bit of materials and after. And he has this whole tutorial online too. And I think that after this, after going through all the tools, you could probably go through that piece by piece if you really wanted to and do it. He also has another great tutorial, which I would bring it up, but I feel like my computer will crash. But it has reflections of the buildings around it. And then, so if you just painted on that, you would kind of remove those reflections. And what he does is cuts those out first and then layers them back on top after. So it's a little bit more work, but again, he is saying that saving time because rendering will take a lot longer. And once you get that system down, it's pretty easy. So I recommend taking a look at that one too. It's pretty amazing what you can do.
So in a rendering like this, would you put all the outer glow lights on like the same level?
Layer.
The same
Yeah. Yep. So everyone does it slightly differently. I would probably do these windows and then these windows on 2 different layers and these lights on a different layer, because these may have a different glow, a different color tone than these. So anything that has similar attributes, you probably want to merge layers or group layers so that you don't have to do each individual piece, right? So trying to just get it systemized. Yeah, and you can see these are just rectangles of a color that have that outer glow effect on it. It's pretty easy, pretty awesome. Okay. Oops. Alright, so what were we doing? Are there any more questions, by the way? Okay. Okay, so blend modes, let's look into that a little bit more. Let's make another layer so that we can keep organized. The thing is, you can have as many layers as your computer can hold, and you can always delete them. So if you don't like something, delete that layer instead of trying to select it out of another layer and deleting it. So more layers is better. Just try to keep them organized. So let's kind of put a hue or color overlay over the entire image. So again, we're going to select paint brush. And this time let's make it really big so that we can just kind of get, that's a little too big. So we can get a big wash, I guess. Let's do about 700, I guess. Okay. Let's do opacity at 20%. And again, these numbers are just things that you kind of have to see and just do as you go along. And I'm taking the opacity down a lot because I want to have a lot of control over where it's saturated and where it's really light. Okay, so you can always keep going over to make it darker, but if the opacity is really high, you can't take that opacity out, which is not really true because you could do it with an eraser. But anyway, again, multiple ways to do things. So 20%, let's change this color because this green is kind of ugly. I don't know, that's kind of pretty. Sure, you can do whatever you want. And then if you click and hold, you just start to add color. Okay, so it's really light. And then what you'll want to do is in the light areas keep the color pretty bold. And then in the darker areas, let the color kind of fizzle out, as how it would be in real life. Okay, so let's just say we do that. I just went over some of these white strips a couple more times. You can see that I think it's kind of touchy. So again, the lower the opacity, the better, the more control you have. Okay, so does everyone have something like this, maybe? And then what I'm going to do is go over to the blend modes and layers. And let's try overlay again. So that's pretty awesome, right? You just get this, everything's kind of hued, this blue color, but you don't lose any of the crisp details. So if I undo, that's what we painted. And if we blend mode overlay, that's what we get. Okay. So you can use this to tone your images, again, creating kind of a cohesion between different photos, or a mood, if you want something to feel warm or cool. This is a good way to do it. And you can always go into this layer and change your brush size, maybe to smaller, and really detail out some of those colors if you want. One note, since I have the layer and overlay, when I draw now, it's always going to be an overlay. So unless I switch this back to normal, I'm not really seeing exactly what I'm drawing. I'm not seeing exactly what I'm drawing in overlay because it's already applying that effect. So that's a preference if you want to switch back and forth between the mode where you can see painting, which is normal, and the mode that already transforms it. Now that we have some drastic color, let's go through some of these other modes. I put the link on under blend modes. It has the description of all these different blend modes, but honestly the best way is just to play. So darken, multiply is used a lot. It makes kind of this darker image. Screen I've used a lot, but you can just see that you get a lot of different effects. Soft light versus hard light. Okay, so that's a really good place to play. It gives you lots of effects with minimal work. Okay. Any questions on blend modes? Okay, cool. All right, so next I have alpha channels, which I use, but I guess I don't really know technically alpha channels. So an alpha channel is basically, if you look in your handout, probably should have pulled this out, but there's this kind of schematic of an image in a background plus this black and white overlay, and then you get an image where the background is removed. So remember, the checkered is transparent. So alpha channel is basically a fancy way of saying cutting out the background. And I guess I don't really use that because I prefer to use masks, which I learned late in the game, and they're really helpful. So let's talk about masks. A mask is basically you can select any area of a layer or the image, whatever you want, and then you can mask part of it so that part becomes clear, and then the other part retains its image, I guess. So let's do it. Let's go to model copy and make a mask. So click on model copy. This little icon, square with circle in it, is the mask. So add layer mask, click on that. You can also right click, I'm pretty sure. If you can't right click, a third place is in the layer menu. So again, lots of ways to get to these things. There are two different masks. There's layer mask and vector mask. So we've been talking a lot about raster images versus vector images. These masks are just those two things. So layer mask is for, it's kind of rastered things, it works in pixels, and vector mask works in lines and shapes. So mainly you'll be using layer mask, I would say. Okay, so you see that we got a little thumbnail next to our image. So this is the layer, and now this is the mask. And the mask is always going to be black and white. So let's go to the selection tools. Let's click on this little polygon lasso thing. Click on it. Or, as you can see, you can press L or Shift L to go through these three. And let's zoom in. Let's cut out this little black area of the photo. And let's say we just want that to be transparent. Okay, so zoom in pretty close. This is one way of selecting things. We'll go into, there's a ton of different ways to select things. We'll go into those more. And with this, you'll click in one spot, drag out a line, click in the next corner, drag. You don't have to hold when you drag, you just drag. Click, drag, click, drag. And all this space is just empty, so you don't need to go perfectly around the photo. Oh, and actually let me do that again to show you. At the end, okay, see when I hover near this, you get that little O, meaning that they're connecting. Okay, so you want to connect those two lines, then you'll get the selected area. And to make a mask, you can delete that area, or you can paint it white, but delete is the easiest. And you see in the little thumbnail, now that area is black, meaning it's transparent. And you can see the checkered behind, meaning it's transparent. So great, we made a mask. Okay, so I selected the black part. I hit delete. So just deleted that out. And when I hit delete, you can see the black shows up here, meaning it's transparent. So this is just Photoshop's language to itself, keeping track of what you're doing. And the good thing about a mask is that you can just click on this mask and delete it, and you'll get the full image again. So it's a great way to just hide certain things without totally destroying the image. Okay, you can press Command D to deselect that. Okay, any questions about masks? You can do this for anything. And if you want to select multiple areas at once, you'll hold Shift when selecting. So select one area, Shift, select the next area. It can get pretty touchy, so be careful when you're selecting, because I've selected a whole lot of stuff, and if you click one wrong step, everything deselects. So be careful. And I don't know a way around that yet. Does anyone else? Okay, great. All right. What's next? Let's double click on this little thumbnail and you'll get a properties menu. So basically everything you do has a whole nother menu of things you can add on to it. And so you'll see you have density, which I don't understand why they don't call it opacity, because you can change basically the opacity here. So remember that this little corner was black. So if I change the density to lower it, you're getting some of that black coming through. Okay, so that's density. And feather is on the edges. So you see we have kind of hard lines here. We can feather that in. But it feathers, obviously you're seeing the black coming through, so it's feathering on the inside. Okay. And then there's a whole nother list of things you can use. But I haven't used those ever. Okay, so we can get rid of this by pressing the little two arrows at the top. And let's start inserting some stuff, because that's more fun. So there's more than 4 ways to cut out figures out of an image. So let's let's search for something. So let's search for your favorite architect, and then standing. Put the word standing in it, and see what images we get. So let's say, if my computer works, that I want Rem Koolhaas in my rendering. And I want him standing. See if we can get something. Got him walking. That'll work. Okay, so pick any image, whatever you want, and download that. And then we're going to show a couple different ways to cut him out, or whoever you prefer, out of their background so you can insert them into your rendering. Where are you, Ren? Yeah, yep. Any way that you can open it in Photoshop, it's fine. Oops. Sorry, extra slow today. Uh-oh. Okay. Sorry about my computer. She's old. Okay, hopefully we'll have him in there. So when you open a new file, it will either go as a tab or as a new window. But you can always switch one or the other by just holding it and dragging it out. So if you want to see two Photoshop files at once, that's the way to make it its own window. And I think you can just put it back in by that. Okay, so now we've got Rem. And the first method is brute force method, which sometimes you have to do when the background is really intricate like this. Okay, so what you can do is zoom in pretty close, and you can start anywhere. And with, I prefer the polygon lasso tool. You can use the magnetic lasso tool, which I'll show you. It just kind of, as you go along, kind of magnetizes to his sleeve. But sometimes that doesn't work. When you start to get areas where it's both white and white, the magnetic lasso won't work. So I prefer to just use the polygon lasso tool and get in close and start outlining his silhouette.
You can also click with the magnetic lasso tool.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I recommend just trying each of these because I think it's a personal preference on how you want to work. We're not going to do this whole thing because you can see it takes a long time. But basically, you would just start. Oops. If you click the wrong spot, let's say I click there, you can press delete, and it will delete that point that you just made. So if you make a mistake, you don't have to start over. You can press delete. So you'll just start. Oops. So here, I made a mistake. You'll see if I press delete, it asked me to fill it in with something. And that's because we didn't change our background file to a layer. It's still that background. So let's duplicate or layer from background. And now when I press delete, it becomes transparent. Okay. So if you don't remember to change that layer, it'll kind of prompt you to do it. Okay, so that is the brute force method. You can imagine going all the way around and getting his silhouette cut out of the background. Okay, it takes a long time, so let's not do that whole thing. Then there's the layer blend method. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of that here. Okay, so we aren't really adding in line work to this image we're working on, but if you were, let's say you have something you did in Illustrator, just black and white line work, you can easily remove this white background by doing layer blend lighten or multiply, depending if it's black or white or black, etc. So this one, and this is written down for you, if you want to hide the white background, you do multiply. So remember that's in these blend modes here. So this menu, multiply. Oops. So if you clicked multiply, that whole white background is removed immediately. So easy way to do that. So for line work and text, that is the best way to get rid of a background. One step. A third method, if you have an image with a fairly simple background. So if you go to the blog, you can click on that the other figure. I'm not going to do that because my computer's really slow and I have the file. But let's open that up. So if you guys go to the blog, you can, I'll open her. I believe she's called Figure. Figure PNG. So open that file in Photoshop. If you can. Any questions so far about cutting out figures? The best method is basically to use online resources. So there's a bunch listed under Internet Resources at the end of that cutting out section, and you can find you can find a whole library of people who have already cut out all these figures. So what I'm showing you is extremely useful if you need certain things in your diagrams or in your renderings. But if you just need generic people or generic furniture, that's the place to go because it cuts out all of this work. Okay, so now we have this figure, but she still has a white-ish background. So one way to get rid of that background is to use the color range selector, and that's under Select, Color Range, and it'll give you a pop-up menu. And it's asking you to sample the color. So you get the little eyedropper, and you can click on the background. And you can see that you get what it's going to take out right now, I guess, in the image. If you adjust fuzziness, you can change that. Okay, so now it's getting rid of more of the background. So let's try that. Okay, but now it's selecting some of her interior. Okay, right, because she has white in her blouse. And we don't want that. So maybe that was too much. So we can go back to, oops. So let's deselect, we didn't want to do that. And go back to color range. and you can try again. This method works better for drawings, I guess. So if you want to keep that hand-drawn line, but you want to get rid of a background, maybe you scanned it or maybe you took a photograph, this is a good way to do that. You can start with low fuzziness. Okay, so now it's not selecting as much of her blouse. And always remember to layer from background. And we can delete that. And then we can try again and get more of the white out, and try again and get more. So let's deselect, select a new color range. Anyway, you get the idea. So this one's a little bit fussy, but if you have drawings and stuff that need this type of detailing, or to keep kind of the feel of maybe charcoal, this is the way to do it. It just takes a longer time. Okay. But let's also, quick note, when you do undo, you can only do it once in Photoshop. Then you have to do step backward. Not really sure why that is, but that's Photoshop's language. Okay, so now I've got her back to where she was in the beginning. And the best way to do this now is to do this magic wand selection tool. Again, this could be a little imprecise as well, but let's try it. So I have the magic wand, I just press something, and presto, it selects what I want. Oops. So I didn't click shift, so it selected something different, but I want to select all, and you can see I get the little plus sign on the icon. So let's keep selecting, zoom in. We don't want this white in her arm, so keep holding shift. We don't want this white. Okay, so that's pretty good, I think. And we can delete that. And if we deselect, Control D, we get the figure cut out. The only thing I would say is we're getting kind of this shadow from her shoe. And let's get rid of that by just doing the polygon lasso tool. And clicking, clicking, clicking to get rid of this shadow. And delete. Okay. Okay. Everyone on board? Yeah.
Is there a reason why you don't use contiguous?
What?
If you like try using if you try like taking off the
Oh, with the magic wand? So I don't typically do that, but you can. So that's a really good point. So magic wand, again, you get this option menu at the top, and you can change the tolerance, like you were saying, to accept more color range. What is contiguous? Do you know?
contiguous is if you take it it only selects the area that's like adjacent to each other.
Oh, okay.
If you, I forgot which one, but if you take it or unpick it, it only selects. So like say if there's like white area between your legs, right?
Uh-huh.
It should also select that.
I see. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But then like pretty sure it's like white.
Right, then it might click on that. Yeah, so the option menu bar is always available to play and refine. So that's a really good point about the tolerance. Okay, so we have our figure. Let's select all by doing Control All. Maybe if I select all. Okay. Copy. Control copy or Control C. And let's go back to our original image, this beautiful blue scene, and paste. And we get a little figure. So when the figure comes in, you can move it around, but you can't do much else to it right now. Does everyone have the figure in the other photo? Yes, no, thank you. All right. Okay, so she looks a little too small for this space, I think. So we want to transform. So whenever you bring another object in, the way that you can change scale, size, shape is to transform. So one way of doing that is edit, transform, free transform or transform. But I prefer to just do Control T, and you get a little box around her. You can see that the figure came in kind of in the middle of all the layers, and let's say that we didn't want her to be blue for some reason. Oh, sorry. This is exactly what I was saying about when you're in transform, you have to hit enter to be able to do anything outside of it. So I hit enter, let's drag her up. And now she's got different coloring. Alright, so let's go back and transform her though. So Control T or edit, free transform. And now we can size. So if you hold shift, you get proportional sizing, and you can move it. I don't know, let's say like that's good. Okay, and then enter to let it go. Okay, so I can't size unless I do Command T. All right. Okay, so now she's just kind of sitting there, and she's not really based in the rendering. So shadows are a really good way to get a figure kind of into the building. And the best way to do that, I found, is to duplicate the layer. Let's call this shadow. And I'm going to rename this so I don't forget figure. Okay. So we've duplicated the layer, so now let's do transform, flip vertical. Okay, so now she's flipped on top. We can move her down. Okay. Alright, so now we've got her reflection. To make it a shadow, a good way to do this is to go to that Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation menu. And this is where we can darken to make it more of a shadow. Okay. And she's got some of the reflection from the floor as well. So this is kind of an intricate rendering, I guess, because there's lots of reflection and light changes, so something to keep an eye on. And then let's change the opacity. Let's try 70. We've got that green thing through it. I'm going to turn that layer off since it's kind of distracting. So layer 1, let's turn that off. And I think that needs to be a little bit darker. So let's go back to the shadow, adjustments, hue saturation, and we can darken it more. Okay, so it's a really crisp shadow though, and it's not distorted at all. So a way you can distort this is to go to Transform, Distort, and sorry about that. And we can start to pull to distort the shadow a little bit. And now I'm probably not really going with the way the light is right now, but let's just ignore that for now. So we want this to kind of be on the floor. Let's say that's good. And then it's still a pretty crisp shadow. So there are two things we can do. Blur and smudge, which are tools on the left. So blur is the little droplet, smudge is the finger smudging. Let's try blur tool first. That's really small, so let's increase the size. Maybe a little more. Okay. And then strength, let's increase that to 100. And you'll just kind of go over the shadow, and it's kind of blurring out the edges, making it less crisp. Yeah?
How did you just make it as a shadow, like black?
Okay, good question. So I'll show you with the figure layer, but it would be on the shadow layer, obviously. But what you can do is go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and you get that lightness menu, and you just want to make that darker. Okay, so you can make it all the way black, whatever you need. Okay. Any other questions on this so far? Okay, so that's looking a lot better, less super photoshopped. Then we can do the smudge tool. So this is good. If you see back here, these reflections are kind of wonky. The floor isn't perfectly crisp and clean. So the smudge tool will give you that effect. It's basically like if you had a charcoal line smudging that, right? So let's decrease the strength because this tool is pretty strong, I guess. And I'm just going to kind of swipe if it's doing it. Swipe across the shadow to get these kind of stripy distortions like you see in these reflections. Okay. So maybe 16% was a little too low because I'm not seeing much distortion. Now we're frozen. Sorry, I think I'm... There we go. Okay. Okay, let's try that. It still doesn't seem to be doing much. I guess I'll increase 50. Thank you. This is another thing I do all the time. It is easily done. So not only do I sit and transform for forever, but I sit in the wrong layer for forever. Thank you, whoever said that. Did blur work? Was I on this layer? Okay. Switched. Okay, thank you. All right, so let's try this on the shadow. Yeah, so remember this because you will probably do it as well. You have to be on the right layer. Still doesn't seem to be working well. Have any of you guys gotten some nice blurs? Okay. What strength did you use? Oh, there we go. You can kind of see her knees kind of wonky now. I don't know. Anyway, it just gives it a little more of a realistic effect, like these reflections down here. Okay. Long way of doing that. Sorry. Okay. So I think that looks pretty good. You could take the opacity down. Another thing you could do that's nifty is use the eraser tool. So that's E, or just click on the little eraser icon. Again, make this bigger. Let's say even bigger. And turn the hardness way down. And the opacity down. So we just want to take out some of this shadow here. So that's probably too opaque even, but take out some of the shadow so it looks like it's fading out, right? It's a little more realistic. So that's a good way to use the eraser tool. Okay. If we had more time, you could also insert her again and reflect her in the window. You could play with all those different types of reflections using the same tools we just used, using transparency because now the reflection's in a window, you can see through it, etc. But I want to show you one more thing in inserting textures or backgrounds. And this is something kind of new to me, so bear with me on this. It might be rough. But I'm going to close out these. Let's just go to the internet and search some sort of background. I'm going to search forest. Let's get an image. So inserting backgrounds is just kind of a nice way to get sight into the renderings, I guess. So if this is in a forest, it's much different than if it's smack next to another building. I'll just choose the first one. So with this, as you start to build Photoshop renderings and stuff, it's kind of good to keep files of textures and backgrounds you like, figures that you like, so you can keep things consistent throughout projects, or just have a library to pull from instead of trying to search for new things each time. Okay, so let's open what you just downloaded. And same as inserting the figures, we're going to, well, actually one thing, if you wanted to do any image manipulation, do it all in a separate file. Then when you're done, bring it in to your image or rendering file. I'm not going to do anything to this photo. This looks pretty, so I'm going to select all. Actually, I'm going to duplicate the layer. Select all, copy, and paste into the model file. Okay. Okay, so let's say, I'm going to move this over for now. So this whole piece here is a window in this model. It's got lots of complex reflections. So I want to put this image and this scene behind that. And so what I can do is kind of move the file over there. Let's size it by Control-T. So it's got to be able to cover that whole space. And we also want it to be scaled correctly. So are the trees really close to you? Are they far away? Let's try that. Enter. And then I'm going to turn the opacity low on this level for now. so that I can make a mask over the portion of the photo that I don't want to see. So I just turn the opacity of that level way down, and now I'm going to go in, similar to when we took out this piece, use the polygon lasso tool and cut out this window here. And I know it's a little hard to see on this file, so it doesn't have to be perfect at all. Let's just say it's here. Okay, so here is something interesting. I've selected the part of the photo that I want to keep, not what I want to delete. So really, really handy tool is inverse the selection. So this isn't inverting the color, it's just inverting the selection. So now I've selected everything else. That's another shortcut that's on this packet that I would recommend getting used to. So now I can delete that selection, and you see we've removed that part of the photo. So let's deselect, bring that opacity back up, and so 100 is pretty overpowering, but what we can do is try these blend modes again, because remember we want those reflections and this forest image to blend together so it's like you're looking through the window. So darken, that doesn't look good. Multiply, definitely not. Some of the better ones for these are screen, or let's see, I think linear, not that one. Linear dodge is okay. Something looks kind of wonky though. Let's try screen again. I think screen looks better. See how linear dodge is pretty contrasty. Let's keep working with screen. And then changing opacity, just to try and see if we can get that image better. Let me think. Okay. I got this better last night, but now I can't think of how. I think I did screen because overlay gets it really contrasty as well. Let's, okay, here's what I think it is. So this is screen when I'm clicked on layer 3. Let me try it where I drag it below the image, click on the image, and try screen. It looks about the same. But sometimes that's a way because if they're on top or bottom, they are blending differently sometimes. So switching those orders sometimes helps. Let's just leave it the way it is for now, if that's okay with you guys. No, we can keep working on it if you want. Okay. What we can do also is on the image, we could create another mask around this window and or select it, and we could change the opacity of that if we wanted to. But I say for now we just leave it how it is. I actually think it's because of the blue color. Okay. So here is another area where if I wanted this to be filled in with forest, we could copy this layer, move it over, and then merge those so that they're on the same file. So anything we do, it's going to affect both of those forest scenes so that they match. And I think that's mainly what I wanted to go over today. So just a couple other tricks. If you're doing something where you need lines and you don't want to drag a ton of ruler lines down, I don't actually know where the menu of this is, but if you do Command or Control apostrophe, you get a whole grid set. So this is really great if, let's say you're out and about taking facade photos, you can set this grid, distort the image so that it fits perfectly into a square, and then paste that on a model or put it in a rendering. So the grid is really great for distorting to certain shapes, or orthogonal shapes, I guess. So that's Control apostrophe, and then to reverse it, the same thing. And also in Transform, there's a whole list of other things. I mainly use Distort because it gives you points around the entire image to move. It gives you lots of freedom. Perspective will give you a 1-point perspective. So let's say I want to make this whole image somehow a perspective. I get these points, and it makes it perspective for me. So I'm just changing this. So maybe for those Mies diagrams and things like that, this is an easy way to keep it in perspective. And then the other one that you may use is Warp. And if you go up to the options bar, you can warp it in very specific ways, which if you need a fish image, you can do that here. Things like that, though. And then two more tools that I'm still really learning how to use, but again, they're on, let me show you. This is that Photoshop tutorial blog I was talking about. And so he has a whole list of tutorials. And when he's making shadows and highlights in models, he uses what's called the burn and dodge tools. And I don't think I could explain them to you at this point, so I'm sorry. But they're basically a way to kind of like burn out part of the page or highlight a part of the page to keep or get really realistic shadows and highlights rather than trying to paint them in. And those are on this tutorial page. So I think once you get to that point, I definitely recommend using that because it seems to make it a lot faster. It's just a little harder learning curve, I guess. I'm still working on that one. And then under resources and tutorials on here, we have this blog, Vionics and Pixel Flakes, and they are awesome architectural rendering blogs. So you can learn a ton by just looking at them. But I think this covers the main tools that you'll use. You can obviously use them in multiple different ways. If you wanted to make a collage, you can just bring in shapes like rectangles and distort those, like in the Mies. Yeah, I think those are the main ones. Do you guys have anything to add?
You can put people in your 3D model and then paste over them with images, or I mean, obviously want us to just get basic shapes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because obviously you see if you do a really simple display render really, really quickly. Maybe just like a little bit of shadow with highlight. I mean, you could do all the shadows in Photoshop, but it's like so maybe if that balance or like tone, or maybe you're using a little bit of geometry, but maybe you can like kind of bring that back down to Photoshop, right? So it kind of like using that base. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's really start to add like a painter, right? It's like the basic points, and then start to build it up as much as you want, places that you want, which with the rendering, like it's going to be that whole area, right? So if you just want to render a site, basically rendering, put it in Photoshop, and now just work with your building. Or maybe you do two different renders, right, at different levels of saturation, and then Photoshop is going to put those two together,
Mhm.
right? So just have like a looseness to Photoshop.
Mhm.
I think there's also benefits to rendering material in Blu-ray if you get good at it. If you're using material and it's here where those scenes are, where you're piling the images together, maybe not the best option. But if you get a good Blu-ray material and you give it some texture and it looks more realistic, and you're applying it to a very complicated geometry that would be difficult to apply to in Photoshop, and like scaling the size or yeah. Yeah.
Good Photoshop, right?
Good, but
But
yeah,
maybe
it'll have to watch like
It's more manual
it
though.
comes down to like your ability.
Yeah.
And then remember with V-Ray, the more objects, textures, and lights you put in, that's exponentially longer the render takes.
I think for me it would be adding that hand touch. Everyone has a different Photoshop style or the way that they see the building. You're not having a computer necessarily generate it for you, like a rendering. You are kind of choosing very particular things. So it kind of adds that personal level in Photoshop. And I guess yeah, it's the balance of how long it's going to take to render it versus how long it's going to take to Photoshop it, and how you want it to look. So I don't know if there is a clear cut for me personally. Yeah, so this, I'd highly recommend this guy's website. So here's one. He has SketchUp model and then kind of rendered it, and then goes through adding sky and texture, and this is what he gets in not very many steps. Okay, so that's kind of, this is the Photoshop difference versus a simple rendering difference. Obviously there are no materials on this or anything, but I guess that's the feeling I get. And then this is, probably won't use it, but it is so cool I had to show you. Just found it yesterday. So we were talking about how you don't want to render a crowd because it's going to take forever. So this Vionics group, this is their end rendering. They drew this little silhouette of a guy. They made it a paintbrush, so that's another thing you can do. And then kind of made it scatter and change. And then they literally painted on, well, so this is 2 steps in one. They painted with a big brush this crowd, took this photo, and overlaid it so that just the scattering of color will be on the people. And let's see if we can get in closer. So now, I mean, these people don't have official clothes, but they've got a smattering of color and it looks like people. And then they just painted shadows and blurred. That's it. So once you get used to Photoshop, you can do things really quickly if you get the workflow down. I think the hardest thing is starting to understand that. Because I personally think it's way different than layers and stuff in Rhino. It's got a different system. Anyway, do you guys have any other questions? Yeah.
When you're using the brush tool, is there a way to make the line more definitive rather than it, reacting to your hand movements?
So yes. I don't know if I ever have done that though. So you mean like orthogonal lines, kind of? I think there's a line tool. And in that line, I think you can still change, maybe. Let's figure. Oh, probably. Yeah, honestly, I think Illustrator is the best bet because that's kind of vector work, but in Illustrator you can still change the brush, so you can get all these fancy, let's see, so over here you can see all the brushes and what they look like.
There's a custom shape tool under the line with the square.
Oh, here? So the only thing with this system is I'm not sure if you don't get all these brush presets. So if you want like an actual paintbrushy stroke, but you want it to be straight, I don't think you can do it in this. If you want just a line, definitely this is the way to make orthogonal lines, just a line. But are you asking for like a line with some sort of like cool texture to it or cool brushy stroke, or just a vector?
I mean, I was just talking about if you want to follow some kind of organic line with your rendering with brush stroke and not have the wobble of your hand.
Can I plug in?
Oh yeah, the drawing pad might
I know what
be.
you mean, and actually I've been looking for that too, and I haven't looked very hard. But if someone can find that, let's figure out how to make like a brush line, right? Because are you talking about when it's like a pencil
Yeah.
line and you can see the little vibrations
Yeah.
of your hand? Yeah, I know what you mean.
I am pretty sure
It'd be nice.
they
if you could
have
take
that in
and have them
Illustrator,
smooth it.
so there's got to be a way.
Yeah, I think there's a way. It's good homework for all of us.
Yeah.
Brains. I don't know if you guys saw on the CETA site, and they may have taken it off this year. Do any of you have drawing tablets? Have you used them? It may be something. There's different levels. Walk-On, WACON, is the company that has been Fanatic kind of the longest and have a really good range of different ones. And it's something that new that I'm exploring too, because you realize, okay, you're drawing on paper, and then you get into the computer and you have this mouse in your hand. Maybe it's tired. Yeah, it just needs to work. And sometimes it can start to feel pretty separate in kind of what you're doing, so you may scan in some of your lines